Martha, Martha, you are worried and anxious about so many things. That's how Jesus gently corrected the woman the Church celebrates today, Saint Martha of Bethany, whose feast falls on July 29. Martha lived in the 1st century, in a small town called Bethany near Jerusalem, in a house that became one of the most welcoming places Jesus had on this earth. In Luke chapter 10, she's the one who receives the Lord into her home and throws herself completely into serving him, while her sister Mary simply sits at his feet to listen. And when Martha complains, asking Jesus to send her sister to help, he doesn't condemn her work, he corrects the anxiety that can make even the most generous service lose its true source, which is the Lord himself. But the most striking moment of Martha's life comes later, when her brother Lazarus dies. In John's Gospel, she runs out to meet Jesus, doesn't hide her grief, and speaks one of the most complete professions of faith in all the Gospels, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is coming into the world." Martha is remembered, to this day, as the patron of cooks, homemakers, housekeepers, innkeepers, and anyone devoted to hospitality. And the lesson she leaves us is simple and direct: God isn't asking us to stop serving, He's asking us to serve without losing our peace, without letting anxiety steal what matters most. On this same day, July 29th, the Church also celebrates Martha's brother, Saint Lazarus of Bethany, the man Jesus wept for out of love, and then called back from death itself. Lazarus lived, like his sisters, in the 1st century, in Bethany, and the Gospels describe him simply as a friend of Jesus. There's nothing more intimate than the message Martha and Mary sent when he fell ill: "Lord, the one you love is sick." But Jesus took his time getting there, and by the time he arrived, Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Standing before it, Jesus wept, one of the most human moments in the entire Gospel, and then ordered the stone rolled away and called out, loudly, "Lazarus, come out." And Lazarus came out, still wrapped in his burial cloths, in front of everyone, as living proof that Jesus truly is the resurrection and the life. That miracle was so public, so impossible to deny, that the religious leaders of the time actually started plotting to kill Lazarus too, just to silence the living witness he had become. The Gospels don't record a single word spoken by him. Lazarus didn't need to say anything. His own life, handed back to him by the power of Christ, was already the whole message. That's why he's remembered, still today, as a special intercessor for anyone facing serious illness or losing hope after the death of someone they love. Lazarus's lesson doesn't need words at all. Even when everything looks lost for days on end, Jesus can still call your name and bring you back to life. And rounding out this family Jesus loved so dearly, July 29th is also the feast of Saint Mary of Bethany, who should not be confused with Mary Magdalene. Even though older traditions sometimes blended the two, the Church's current calendar celebrates them as distinct people. Mary also lived in the 1st century, in that same house in Bethany, and she's the one who sits at Jesus' feet while her sister Martha busies herself with serving. When Martha complains, Jesus answers that Mary has chosen the better part, not because listening matters more than serving, but because every true Christian act has to be born first from attentive listening to God's word. When Lazarus dies, it's Mary who, hearing that Jesus is calling for her, gets up quickly, runs to him, falls at his feet, and says through tears, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Her weeping, and the weeping of those around her, deeply moved Jesus himself. But perhaps Mary's most beautiful gesture comes 6 days before Passover. She takes a pound of pure nard, an extremely expensive perfume, anoints Jesus' feet with it, and wipes them with her own hair, filling the whole house with its fragrance. Jesus interprets that gesture as a preparation for his own burial, a love that doesn't calculate, that holds nothing back for later. Mary of Bethany is offered, to this day, as a model of contemplative life and attentive listening to God's word. And she teaches us that sometimes the greatest proof of love isn't what we do, but how willing we are to stop, listen, and give away what we treasure most. More than 1,000 years after those 3 siblings from Bethany, the Church celebrates, on this same July 29th, a man who traded a brilliant career for monastic life, Blessed Pope Urban II. He was born around 1042 in Châtillon-sur-Marne, France, and died on July 29, 1099, in Rome. Trained in Reims under the influence of Saint Bruno, Urban had a guaranteed future as a canon and archdeacon, but he gave it all up around 1070 to enter the monastery of Cluny, seeking a simpler life closer to God. It was Pope Saint Gregory VII who called him back into the world, summoning him to Rome to help with the reform of the Church. Urban became a cardinal and a tireless defender of the Church's freedom against emperors and nobles who wanted to control the appointment of bishops. He was even imprisoned once, by order of Emperor Henry IV, for that very loyalty. Elected pope in 1088, he endured years of poverty and even exclusion from Rome itself, but he never stopped fighting corruption within the clergy. And it was Urban who, at the Council of Clermont in 1095, made the appeal that would change the history of Europe and the Middle East, launching the First Crusade. It's important to say this honestly, Urban's intentions do not make the abuses committed afterward, in that cause, acceptable. He died just 2 weeks after Jerusalem was taken, without ever even hearing the news. Urban too is remembered for his faithfulness to church reform, his monastic life, and his pastoral perseverance through deeply unstable times, a reminder that serving God sometimes costs everything, and is still worth it. Meanwhile, much farther north in Europe, the Church also celebrates today a warrior king who became a saint, Saint Olaf II Haraldsson, patron of Norway, killed in battle on that same July 29, in the year 1030. Olaf was born around 995 and grew up in the violent world of the Viking Age, joining military expeditions while still young. It was through contact with England and the continent that he came to know Christianity more deeply, and he returned to a divided Norway, being recognized as king around 1015. His reign tried to do two things at once: unify the kingdom and spread the Christian faith. He brought in clergy, promoted churches, and helped shape one of Norway's earliest Christian legal codes. It's worth being honest here, that Christianization didn't happen through persuasion alone, it also involved royal authority and coercive measures, something later devotion to Olaf didn't always like to dwell on. Resistance from local chieftains, backed by King Knut, forced him into exile in 1028. When he tried to reclaim his throne, Olaf fell at the Battle of Stiklestad. And it was there, in defeat, that the saint was born. Reports of healings at his tomb spread quickly, his body was said to be incorrupt, and the city of Nidaros became one of medieval Northern Europe's greatest pilgrimage centers. The death that looked like total failure ended up being exactly what secured Christianity's hold on Norway. Saint Olaf is remembered as Norway's national patron, and his life teaches something that applies to any of us. Sometimes the most painful defeat is exactly what God uses to plant something that lasts for centuries. Going back several centuries, but to a completely different kind of trial, the Church also celebrates today Saint Lupus of Troyes, a bishop who faced down the Huns themselves to protect his people. Lupus was born around 383 to 395 in Toul, in Gaul, and died in Troyes in 478 or 479, the date the Roman martyrology marks on July 29. He was born into Gallo-Roman aristocracy and even married Paminiola, the sister of Saint Hilary of Arles. But after a few years of marriage, the two separated by mutual agreement to pursue religious life. Lupus gave away everything he owned to the poor and entered the monastery of Lérins, one of the great spiritual training centers of the age. Around 426, he was chosen Bishop of Troyes, a role he would hold for more than 50 years, through one of the most unstable periods in European history. The Western Roman Empire itself was collapsing around him. But the most famous episode of his time as bishop happened in 451, during the Hunnic invasion. Tradition holds that Lupus personally went out to meet Attila, prayed for the city, and secured Troyes' survival. It's true that the exact details of that meeting belong more to popular devotion than to fully documented history, but the picture of a courageous bishop who stayed with his people through the worst of times is solidly historical. Lupus is remembered as the protector of Troyes, and his life teaches that real courage sometimes isn't about fighting with weapons, it's simply refusing to abandon the people who trust you. In medieval Brittany, another bishop would face a very different kind of battle, not against foreign invaders, but against local political power itself. This is Saint William Pinchin, Bishop of Saint-Brook, born between 1178 and 1184 and who died on that same July 29, in 1234, later canonized by Pope Innocent IV in 1247. William was elected Bishop of Saint-Brook around 1220, and contemporary sources describe him as a man of simple life, austere prayer, and extraordinary attention to those in need. During famines, he treated the poor like his own family, using the diocese's resources to help them. He also began the reconstruction of the Saint-Étienne Cathedral, a project he would never live to see finished. His most serious conflict was with Peter I of Brittany, known as Mauclerc, who was trying to expand ducal control over church property and rights. William refused to give up what he saw as his pastoral and legal duty, and he paid dearly for it. He was harassed and eventually exiled, taken in by the Diocese of Poitiers, where, even in exile, he kept helping the local bishop, who was ill. He only returned to his own see around 1230, resuming his care for the people and the cathedral works until his death. After he died, devotion at his tomb grew so fast that his canonization came just 13 years later, remarkably quick for the era. William is still remembered as the patron and protector of Saint Brooke, and his life teaches that defending what's right, even when it costs you everything, is never wasted. Many centuries later, on the other side of the world, in China, the Church celebrates today a young seminarian who chose death over denying his faith, Saint Paul Chin Chongpin. He was born into a very poor, not yet Christian family on April 11, 1838, in Guizhou province, and was beheaded in Qinyan on that same July 29, 1861, canonized by Pope St. John Paul II in the year 2000, alongside St. Augustine Zhaorong and 118 other martyrs of China. Paul grew up during a time of intense tension between the Christian presence and local culture, but thanks to a missionary charity, he received an education and entered the minor seminary as a child, being baptized on Christmas of 1853. Missionary sources describe him as a gentle, calm young man, and when his own father asked him to come home, Paul stayed firm on the path he was convinced was his calling. In 1861, already at the major seminary, soldiers raided the institution and arrested the Christians they found there, including Paul and 2 companions. Accounts say they were locked in a hot, damp cell, humiliated, and subjected to torment, and none of them agreed to deny their faith. On July 29, Paul and his companions were led to their deaths and beheaded. A woman who had been helping them, Martha Wang Louzhi, chose to share in their martyrdom voluntarily. Her story, in fact, is the very next one we tell today. Paul is remembered now as a special model for seminarians and young people who feel called to serve God, even when that calling costs everything. His life proves that age has nothing to do with the depth of someone's faith. And it's that very same courageous woman the Church celebrates next, Saint Martha Wang Louzhi, a lay widow who chose to die alongside the people she was helping. Martha was born around 1802 in Junyi, also in Guizhou province, and died in Qinyan on that same July 29, 1861, canonized together with Paul Chin Chongpin and the other martyrs of China in 2000. She married, had no children of her own, adopted 2 nephews, and after being widowed and losing what little her family had, she supported herself by running a small inn and making straw sandals with her own hands. In 1852, she met a traveling missionary, began learning about the Catholic faith, and was baptized that Christmas, taking the name Martha. From then on, she served local Catholic communities without any recognition, working in the kitchen, the laundry, caring for children, and when the region's major seminary opened, she became the one in charge of its kitchen. That's how she came to know Paul Chin Chongpin and the other seminarians. During the persecution of 1861, when they were arrested, Martha risked her own life bringing them food, clean clothes, and messages, despite constant threats. And on the day of the execution, she watched the procession pass, followed the seminarians to the very end, and refused to leave them. She was beheaded alongside them, entirely by her own choice. Martha is remembered today as a model for widows, for anyone who serves the Church without ever seeking the spotlight, and her life proves that holiness doesn't always happen on a grand stage. Sometimes it's born in a kitchen, in silence, and only reveals itself fully in the moment you have to choose to stay. And we close today's July 29th journey in revolutionary France, with Blessed Charles-Antoine-Nicolas Ancel, a priest who died not by a blade, but slowly consumed by the cruelty of a floating prison. Ancel was born in Rouen on October 11, 1763, became a priest of the Congregation of Jesus and Mary, the Eudists, and was teaching at a seminary when the French Revolution changed everything. The new civil constitution of the clergy demanded priests swear an oath many considered incompatible with communion with the Church, and Ancel, out of loyalty to his conscience and the ministry he had received, refused to take it. He was arrested and included among the priests sentenced to deportation, sent in 1794 to the port of Rochefort. But because a naval blockade prevented the voyage to Guyana, hundreds of priests and religious were crammed onto former slave ships called Les Deux Associés and Washington. Starvation, unbearable heat, complete lack of hygiene, and disease turned those vessels into floating places of death. That's how, consumed by illness caught in those deliberately inhumane conditions, Ancel died on July 29, 1794, aboard the Les Deux Associés. The Church recognizes that silent suffering as true martyrdom, because his imprisonment and death happened specifically out of hatred for the priesthood and Catholic fidelity. He was beatified by Pope St. John Paul II in 1995. And with that, we close today's 10 saints. If any of these lives touched your heart, subscribe here to Saint of the Day, comment asking one of these saints to intercede for someone you love, and share this video with anyone who might need to hear this message today. Every share like that is truly a small act of evangelization. And remember, the full prayer to each of these saints is right here in the video description.